Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a side of history most textbooks wouldn't dare touch, the bedroom lives of medieval queens. And I'll warn you right now, you probably won't survive this, not emotionally anyway. You might start the night thinking royal beds were all silk sheets and candlelight, but by the time we're through you'll be side-eyeing your pillows and wondering how anyone got any sleep in a palace filled with spies, superstition and political seduction. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and the time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the cold halls of a medieval castle, your feet padded with thick rushes and the scent of rosemary and old stone all around. It's drafty, that's the first thing you notice. You've been dressed in at least 5 layers of heavy cloth, but somehow this chill still creeps in. You are a princess, but not the fairy tale kind. You're a treaty in human form, a dowry wrapped in flesh. Your marriage isn't about love, or even like. It's about borders, allegiances, and whether your womb will bear the next ruler. You're not just a person, you're a geopolitical strategy. When a medieval queen marries, it's rarely to the man of her choosing. In fact, odds are she's never had a real conversation with him. Maybe she saw his portrait, idealised of course, with oddly pale skin and hands that look suspiciously like someone else painted them. The marriage arrangements happen when you're still practically a child. Some girls are betrothed at age 5, married by 12, and expected to conceive shortly after. Romantic, right? Let's take Eleanor of Aquitaine as an example, one of the most powerful and well-known queens of the medieval period. Her first marriage was to Louis VII of France, a union forged not by attraction but by land. The Duchy of Aquitaine, which she brought with her, was wealthier than the French crown itself. That made her a high-stakes prize. The French needed her land. She needed to survive the political chessboard. And so a ceremony was arranged. But what did marriage really mean for a queen? Before we even get to the physical part, which we absolutely will, we need to understand the ceremony itself. It was extravagant, sure, velvets, incense, endless masses, but also deeply symbolic. A queen's wedding dress wasn't always white, that tradition comes later. It was often golden or richly embroidered, symbolising prosperity and divine favour. The joining of hands, the blessing of bedsheets, the exchange of rings, it was theatre with the real-world consequences. And yet, underneath all the ritual, there was something uncomfortably transactional. You're handed over from one royal household to another, like prized livestock. Your name might even change. Your signature does. You give up your native tongue, your old friends, your customs, and even the god you pray to, if the kingdom you marry into is of a different faith. The marriage transforms you entirely, and not necessarily for your benefit. What's even weirder is how the political nature of your new role turns your sex life into public concern. From the moment you're crowned and veiled, your body is no longer yours. Everyone's watching, not literally, that comes later, but spiritually, socially, and religiously. Did she bleed on the sheets? Is she still a virgin? Can she bear children? Is she cursed? Questions like these buzz around your new court like flies on a feast table. Here's your historical fact for the night. The marriage of Isabella of Valois to Richard II of England happened when she was just 6 years old. Yes, 6. Now, before your eyebrows leap off your face, she didn't live with him as a wife immediately. They waited until she was older. But it still underscores how these unions were preposterously young by modern standards. Childhood ended early, especially if you had royal blood and a useful bloodline. Now for a fringe fact, many medieval people believed that sex on certain days, like holy feast days, would result in monstrous children. So queens, whose sexual lives were already scheduled and strategic, had to avoid entire chunks of the calendar. Not ideal when your only job is to produce an heir and not a werewolf baby. And here's a scholarly debate that still swirls. How much say did queens really have in their marriages? On paper, many were consulted, but how meaningful was that? Some historians argue that powerful women like Eleanor of Aquitaine or Catherine of Aragon managed to use their status to push back, delay, or manipulate these unions in their favour. Others say that's just wishful thinking, retroactively applying feminist agency to a time that didn't value it. Either way, the record is murky, and often written by men who didn't care to record a queen's opinion, unless she was causing trouble. So here you are, a new queen in an unfamiliar land, surrounded by strangers dressed in a gown that weighs as much as a small dog. You're sitting beside a husband who may or may not speak your language. He might be handsome, he might not. You have no control over that. You're smiling through the endless toasts, the sermons, the Latin, the goat roasts, the chants, the ceremonial hand-holding. But underneath it all is this one heavy, silent expectation. You must produce an heir, preferably a boy, and preferably soon. You start to realise that your wedding wasn't the finish line, it was just the starting pistol. And the bedroom? Oh, we're getting there. But for now, just breathe in the musty scent of the castle, the candle wax, the fear you're trying not to show. Tomorrow, or maybe even tonight, you'll face what every medieval queen must eventually confront. The strange collision of duty, intimacy, and spectacle. You'll be touched not for love, but for legacy. Watched not for beauty, but for fertility. Welcome to the strange, cold, velvet-draped world of royal marriage. The wedding is over, the feast has stretched into night, and now all eyes turn to the one moment everyone's truly been waiting for, the bedding ceremony. You've barely eaten, too nervous to swallow more than a few mouthfuls of bland stewed meat, but that hardly matters. This isn't a celebration for you, this is ritual theatre, and you're the star. The audience? Dozens of courtiers, priests, and noble relatives who don't intend to leave until they've personally ensured that the marriage is real. You're walked through the halls by torchlight draped in a thin linen shift, your wedding gown stripped away by giggling maids and serious-faced matrons. Your husband is marched through a different corridor, similarly disrobed, already a little drunk, maybe a little anxious himself. The bedding ceremony is exactly what it sounds like. You are both escorted to a marriage bed, not privately but with witnesses, actual, breathing, nosely witnesses. And they're not shy. One courtier might toss a stocking onto the bed for luck. Another, maybe a bishop, might offer a short prayer or a very long one, depending on how much he likes hearing his own voice. You're tucked under heavy covers, side by side, possibly still strangers. Your hands might touch, your knees might not. Sometimes the attendants leave after the ceremonial tucking in. Sometimes they don't. They stay, waiting, hoping for noises or blood. At court, people will actually check the sheets the next morning. Not just for gossip, but for royal record keeping. This isn't about affection, this is insurance. The marriage must be consummated, or it isn't considered valid in the eyes of church or kingdom. And if it's not valid, well then your enemies can declare the whole thing a farce and start a war. Or worse, annul it, erase your title, and ship you back like damaged goods. Let's pause here for a chilling historical detail. In 1382, Anne of Bohemia married King Richard II of England. Their marriage was unusually private by royal standards, which caused a flurry of speculation. Was it consummated? Was it valid? Even though Anne was widely loved, rumours of a chaste union dogged them for years. Richard was accused of being disinterested in women, possibly even celibate or gay, though evidence is thin. What's undeniable is how much the pressure to consummate shaped both their public image and their private lives. And here's a quirky aside. In some parts of medieval Europe, it was common to warm the royal marriage bed with hot stones and scented oils to create a kind of temporary spa for the newlyweds. Sounds nice, until you remember that dozens of people might be standing there, commenting on the scent while staring at your ankles. Lavender, a bit scandalous. Rosewater, very proper. Clove oil, too Eastern, that kind of thing. Now, there's scholarly debate around how literal these ceremonies were. Did people really stay in the room? Did they actually watch? Or was it more symbolic? Tucking in the couple, then filing out with awkward coughs and blessings? Some historians argue that accounts of eyewitness consummation were exaggerated, even mythical. Court gossip turned into official record. Others insist that in high-stakes unions, especially those uniting rival kingdoms, the watchers didn't just stay, they stayed late. They needed proof, even if that meant holding up a sheet and nodding grimly at a suspiciously red stain that may or may not have been authentic. And what if the bride and groom didn't, well, perform? What if nerves, fear, or dislike interfered? In those cases, doctors might be summoned. Yes, doctors. With herbs, charms, or, God help you, mechanical instruments. You might be prescribed a fertility potion, or told to eat spicy foods, or to bathe in certain waters. One queen, Margaret of France, was believed to have fasted for days before her wedding night, hoping that purification would prepare her. Instead, she fainted during the ceremony and was accused of being cursed. The stakes were always high, the expectations absurd. Meanwhile, you're lying there, trying not to cry, trying to ignore the ache in your hips from kneeling through 6 masses, or the sharp metal pin still stuck in your elaborate braided hairstyle. You might not even know what's expected of you. Sex education, medieval style, ranged from figure it out to just lie still and think of God. In some cases, older women, usually stern dowagers or whispering nuns, offered vague advice, mostly euphemisms and warnings. Don't let him spill his seed outside of you, one might say, eyes darting nervously. The angels are watching. And that brings us to a more spiritual layer of pressure, the belief that this act wasn't just physical but divine. Your body was now a sacred conduit for the next king or queen, which meant any hesitation, any resistance might not just offend your husband, but God himself. No pressure. In this dim chamber, the flickering candlelight casts shadows on stone walls, and you glance at your new husband, maybe hoping for a smile, maybe bracing for disappointment, and you wonder, how many queens before you lay in this same bed, feeling this same mix of dread and detachment? Another fringe detail? Some royal beds were enormous, not for comfort, but for symbolic authority. A literal throne of bedding. Giant canopies, embroidered with family crests and saints' faces, loomed over you like judgmental ancestors. Some queens even brought their own portable beds when they married abroad, unwilling to surrender their own familiar furniture to a foreign nation. As if a known mattress might offer some measure of safety, you lie awake long after the last torch is doused. Outside, a wolf howls, or maybe it's just a dog. Either way, you're not sleeping tonight. And in the morning, when you emerge with tired eyes and rumpled hair, everyone will be watching your face, reading it like scripture. Did she do it? Is she pregnant already? What if she's barren? The pressure won't end, not now, not ever. Because this wasn't about love. This was a royal ritual, a national duty. And you're no longer just a woman, you're a queen. And every private moment you have from now on is somehow everybody's business. Morning brings no mercy. The castle is awake long before the sun, and so are you. There's a knocking at your door, not a gentle one, but sharp and certain. A lady in waiting enters without waiting for a reply, followed by 2 more. They bring warm water in silver basins, a comb carved from bone, and a towel embroidered with the crest of your new family. You're expected to look refreshed, dignified, glowing even. Never mind that you didn't sleep, never mind that your head aches and your nerves are frayed. You're a queen now, and queens don't get to look tired. But before you're allowed to dress, there's one more ritual to endure. The sheets. Yes, those sheets, the ones from the wedding night. A servant, usually older and well-versed in discretion, will discreetly retrieve them. Sometimes they're shown to a chamberlain. Sometimes they're paraded more publicly, hung from a window or handed to a bishop to confirm the evidence. What they're looking for is blood, of course, the so-called proof of virginity. Here's where things get awkward. Not all women bleed their first time. That's just anatomy. But medieval people didn't know that. To them, no blood meant no virginity. And no virginity, that meant scandal, annulment, even war. So it wasn't uncommon for a helpful handmaid to provide a little theatrical flair. Maybe a small cut on the thigh or a few drops of animal blood hidden in the bedclothes. This wasn't seen as deception so much as survival. Historical fact for this section. In 1476, Margaret of Denmark's wedding night caused a scandal when no blood was found on the sheets. The Danish court nearly accused her of being unchaste, despite her young age and known piety. Her defenders had to argue, using religious texts and testimonies from her childhood, that she was pure in flesh and intent, even if the sheets didn't show it. The fact that purity had to be litigated with this much precision tells you everything about how obsessed these societies were with symbolic blood. And what happens if a queen really doesn't bleed and there's no cover story? Then come the virginity tests. Yes, actual tests. Usually performed by older noble women or, in worse cases, physicians with very questionable methods. These weren't medical so much as superstitious. Some tested whether a woman could jump or run without discomfort. Others examined physical appearance, narrow hips, pale skin, modest posture. In the most invasive cases, the examinations turned clinical, which was as humiliating as it sounds. Your dignity? Not considered. Your consent? Hilarious. One fringe belief circulating through courts and churches alike was that a true virgin's breath would fog up a mirror held beneath her nose, but a woman who had known lust would not. The logic behind this was as solid as a sponge bridge, but it persisted for centuries. Some queens probably endured this and pretended it was normal. Others, we can only hope, rolled their eyes so hard it rattled the crown. So now, back to you. You've been washed, dressed in your first official day gown, a weighty affair stitched with pearls and lined in ermine, and you're ushered into the royal hall. Everyone's there. Courtiers, bishops, and ambassadors from foreign lands, you're paraded in like a prize animal at a market, expected to say a little nod and take your throne beside the king. You try to ignore the whispers, the way everyone's eyes flick to your midsection as if a pregnancy might already be showing. You sip watered wine and nod as a priest blesses your union again, this time with heavy hints about fruitfulness and multiplying. And beneath it all, you feel the stirrings of pressure taking root in your stomach. Not morning sickness, but something worse. Expectation. This isn't just about consummation anymore. This is about the air. And here's the scholarly debate worth sitting with tonight. Were queens genuinely expected to enjoy any of this? Some medieval texts, especially those written by clergymen, insisted that women should remain chaste in mind even within marriage. That means doing your duty without taking pleasure. Others, like the scandalous Romance of the Rose, suggested women were just as sensual as men, if not more. But queens weren't regular women. They were supposed to be aloof, untouched, half divine, saints in silk. The very idea of royal pleasure was considered dangerous, even corrupting. So most queens learned to hide it, or never discovered it at all. One courtier's diary from the 14th century describes a queen who blushed after the bedding as though she had been whipped. Was it shame, pain, shyness? It doesn't say, but the writer admired it. A blushing queen was a virtuous queen. A satisfied one? Well, that was suspicious. It's ironic, really. Your body is scrutinized constantly, your posture, your complexion, your gait, but your own feelings are invisible and maybe irrelevant. Whether you liked your husband or hated the experience, it doesn't matter. What matters is what the court believes happened, and what they believe will be written into history, whether it's true or not. Let's zoom in for a moment on one queen who subverted expectations. Blanche of Castile, the mother of Louis IX, was a master of ceremonial appearances. After her wedding, she manipulated the rumours about her virginity and purity to build a persona of near-divine motherhood. She used it as political armour, weaponising modesty as strategy. Whether she played innocent or actually was, we'll never know, but the persona worked. She ruled as regent for years, wielding her sexuality like a sealed box, powerful because no one was ever quite sure what was inside. Now, back to your throne. As you sit and smile for the lords of the realm, a part of you wonders what happens if you can't get pregnant right away. What if you don't get pregnant at all? The answer is simple: blame. And not just from courtiers, from priests, from servants, from your husband, from foreign dignitaries. You'll be sent fertility amulets, told to avoid certain foods, pressured to pray at shrines or undergo blessings. Midwives will whisper recipes made from herbs and ground deer antler. Nothing will be private anymore. Not your cycle, not your dreams, not even your prayers. You try to sit up straighter, keep your hands folded, breathe deeply. You're not just a wife, you're a symbol now. Of hope, of lineage, of alliances that could crumble if your body doesn't cooperate. So you play your part even if your skin still tingles with shame from the night before, and your mind is still replaying every awkward moment under those heavy sheets. Because this is only the beginning. You've survived the ceremony, but the real game is just starting. The days after the wedding slide into a routine, but not the kind that brings comfort. You're watched constantly, not in a paranoid, distant way, but intimately. Your meals are monitored. Your sleep schedule is public knowledge. Even your moods become political signals. If you're quiet, they'll say you're homesick. If you're animated, they'll whisper you must be pregnant already. Every time you cough or eat a grape, someone somewhere starts drafting a letter to a foreign ambassador speculating about the state of your womb. You're told that your womb is sacred now, a vessel blessed by God, chosen to carry royal blood. This isn't a metaphor to your priests. They mean it literally. There are entire ceremonies designed to sanctify the queen's body before she conceives. In some courts, you'd be anointed with holy oil on your belly, or made to drink blessed wine in the presence of a bishop, is not about belief, it's about image. The more divine your body appears, the more legitimate your future child becomes. Historical fact time. In the late 13th century, Queen Margaret of Scotland was blessed in a special mass designed specifically for fertility, performed by 3 bishops and attended by most of the Scottish court. The blessing involved readings from the Book of Genesis, prayers to the Virgin Mary, and, strangely, a ritual that included placing relics near her abdomen while chanting psalms. No pressure, right? This brings us to the most surreal part of being a medieval queen. You are not a person. You're a womb, a glorified, well-dressed, anointed, and monitored incubator. People write letters about you that say things like, "God willing, her fruit will be bountiful." That's not poetry, that's statecraft. And if you don't bear fruit, then things get awkward. The church and your confessor remind you constantly that fertility is tied to piety. If you're not conceiving, maybe you sinned. Maybe you thought a lustful thought. Maybe you didn't pray hard enough during intercourse. You're encouraged to confess even the smallest sexual impulses, especially if they occurred outside of your marital duties. And yes, marital sex can be a sin too, if you enjoy it too much, or if it happens on a holy day or in the wrong position. There are diagrams, actual diagrams. The confessor listens with a mixture of concern and quiet judgment. Sometimes he writes it down, sometimes he gives you penance. In one case from the 14th century, a queen confessed to impure dreams and was told to sleep with a stone under her pillow to remind her of mortality. Charming. Another queen was forced to walk barefoot to mass for a week, as atonement for carnal disobedience. What did that mean? She had initiated sex. Apparently that was too bold for a woman whose job was to be a holy vessel. Now let's add in the fringe stuff. Fertility wasn't just a biological or spiritual matter, it was magical. Folk remedies were alive and well at court, often smuggled in by midwives or whispering servants. You might be told to eat pigeon hearts, or to sleep with a poppy seed sachet under your breast. Some queens wore amulets made of dried frog skin wrapped in linen. Others swallowed concoctions of honey, thyme, and ground pearls, believing it would heat the womb. None of this worked, of course, but it gave people something to do while waiting for your belly to swell. And this waiting is not private. People stare, literally stare at your stomach when you walk into a room. If you wear looser clothes, the rumours start. If you eat more than usual, someone will say they heard a midwife was summoned. Your husband might start to act differently, gentler if he believes you're pregnant, colder if he thinks you're failing him. And you start to believe it too. You question your body, you pray harder, you sleep less. Here's the scholarly debate of the night. Did queens really buy into this sacred womb narrative, or were they simply trapped by it? Some argue that queens found empowerment in their role as life-givers, used it to solidify political alliances and personal influence. After all, producing a male heir secured your position, and sometimes granted you actual power. Others suggest the opposite, that these women internalized the shame and fear and lived in constant anxiety over their performance as human vessels. The truth, as always, probably lives in between. Some queens played the game, others were devoured by it. Back in your reality, you find yourself watching the other women at court, ladies in waiting, visiting duchesses, older widows. Some have already had children, others haven't. They all carry a certain look in their eyes, part sympathy, part calculation. Everyone knows what's at stake. They've seen it before. The queens who fail to conceive often disappear from history's spotlight. Some are quietly sent back to their homeland. Others live out their days in shadowy back rooms of the palace, their titles stripped, their portraits removed from the walls. But for now, you still wear the crown. You still walk the halls with 2 handmaidens at your side and a train that sweeps behind you like a silk echo. You still have time, maybe. The pressure is unbearable, but also strangely intoxicating. Because if you do it, if you get pregnant, give birth to a healthy boy, then you win. You don't just secure your place, you elevate it. You become more than queen. You become mother of the future. And so you keep pretending not to notice the watchers. You keep drinking the herbal teas and muttering the Latin prayers and following the odd conflicting rules. No garlic, no hot baths. Intercourse only when the moon is full, but not too full. Avoid fish on Tuesdays. Kiss a relic. Don't smile too much lest it stir desire. You lay in your perfumed sheets at night, surrounded by candlelight and silence, and wonder if your body is a gift or a curse. And somewhere, Maybe on the other side of the stone wall, a court scribe is already drafting a letter that begins, "The Queen has not yet quickened, though her cheeks remain flushed with divine hope." By now, you've mastered the art of the royal smile, that serene, faintly beatific expression you wear like a second crown. It's the look of a woman who is always composed, never flustered, perpetually hopeful, and above all fertile. Every movement you make is slow, graceful, and calculated. If you trip, they'll say it's a sign of pregnancy. If you're too energetic, they'll whisper you've miscarried and are overcompensating. It's exhausting with this constant theatre, but you've learned to live in it, maybe even thrive in it if you're careful enough. Everyone's still waiting for the signs. The Queen must be quickened, that ancient term for the first flutter of life felt in the womb. Medieval medicine believed this moment meant the soul had entered the fetus. You'd think it would be private, it's not. Once you feel the baby move, you're expected to announce it, publicly, sometimes even in a formal audience with witnesses. One chronicler described a queen placing her husband's hand on her belly during court with a triumphant nod as the nobles bowed in reverence. The room reportedly broke into spontaneous prayer, or maybe just polite clapping, it's hard to say. But that's only if it happens. If it doesn't, if the weeks pass and your belly stays flat, whispers begin to echo through the corridors like smoke. The first to doubt you are the midwives, then the ladies in waiting, then the bishops, then your husband. You start to feel the power slipping from your fingers. So like many queens before you consider the tools they never write about in the official histories. Potions, talismans, and prayers not sanctioned by Rome. You seek out your senior lady in waiting, a woman who has seen 3 royal births and 1 suspiciously timed disappearance, and she brings you a vial of thick, bitter liquid said to open the gates of fruitfulness. It smells like metal and mint and something vaguely like ashes. You take it anyway, because what choice do you have? You drink it alone, kneeling in your nightgown on the cold stone floor of the chapel. Somewhere between desperation and devotion, you whisper promises to saints you've never even heard of. Historical fact. In 1311, Queen Clemence of Hungary, wife of Louis II of France, was so closely monitored during her pregnancy that she was assigned a team of 20 attendants to watch her night and day. After her husband's death, her unborn child became the potential heir to the throne. The stakes were so high, no one trusted her to be alone. Her every move was tracked, and when she finally gave birth to a son, he was crowned posthumously at just 5 days old. He ruled for exactly 5 days, then he died. The kingdom fell into chaos. That's how much rested on one womb, one baby, one breath. And here's where things get even stranger. Some people truly believe that royal pregnancies were miraculous, divine gifts sent by God to bless a just king or a holy queen. Your ability to conceive was seen as more than just health, it was moral proof. If your body refused, clearly you'd sinned, or worse, you were cursed, or worse still, a witch. Yes, that accusation was always lurking in the shadows, especially when things didn't go as expected. A queen who didn't conceive might be accused of using dark magic to prevent it, especially if she was educated, foreign, or simply unpopular. One fringe belief claimed that women could tie their wombs shut with secret spells, keeping royal seed from taking root. The church never confirmed this, of course, but plenty of people believed it anyway. And in case you're wondering, no, there were no male fertility tests. The king was always assumed to be virile, no matter how unhealthy, disinterested, or biologically improbable that was. If the queen didn't get pregnant, it was her fault. Period. Medieval logic at its finest. Now, let's explore the strange little rituals that followed a queen who did become pregnant. You might be given a blessed girdle, essentially a decorated belt believed to protect you and the unborn child. It might be made of silk, leather, or even chainmail, inscribed with religious symbols or the names of saints. You would wear it constantly, day and night. In some courts, you were forbidden to ride horses. In others, you were encouraged to do exactly that, under the logic that jostling helped implantation. The problem? No one really knew what they were doing, but they knew how to pretend. You're ushered into special masses, surrounded by incense and muttered prayers. The clergy treat you like a walking relic. You're expected to abstain from sin. No strong wine, no lewd songs, no more sex. Even if your husband disagrees, you're holy now, at least until the birth. And then, everything changes again. Here's the scholarly debate for tonight. Did medieval people actually believe in the sanctity of royal wombs, Or was it a convenient way to control queens? Historians are divided. Some argue that the myth of the Sacred Mother gave queens soft power, social leverage and reverence. Others argue it was a gilded cage, using divine language to justify surveillance, pressure and absolute obedience. Either way, it placed queens in a strange limbo, exalted and imprisoned, praised and suffocated, divine and disposable. But maybe the strangest part? You start to believe it too. After weeks of ceremonies, blessings, herbal brews and whispered invocations, you begin to see your body as something not entirely yours. You place your hands on your stomach and imagine light growing inside you. You wake from dreams of birds nesting beneath your ribs. You think of your blood not as blood but as ink, writing the next chapter of a kingdom's story. And when your next cycle comes, heavy and undeniable, you say nothing. You don't scream, you don't cry, you just dress in thicker layers, attend your duties and let the rumours quietly fade again. Because you're a queen, and queens don't bleed in public. Instead, you wait for the next full moon, the next herbal tincture, the next mass, the next prayer. You are the body that must bloom, or the kingdom wilts. So you sit in your chamber, watching the wind stir the curtains, and you whisper again to the saints, the spirits, or whatever might be listening. Let me grow life. Let me be worthy. Time becomes fluid in a medieval palace. Days blur into nights, weeks into months, and still the expectations press against you, like the tight laces of your ceremonial gown. You've learned how to move like a queen, slow, serene, calculated. But inside you're still chasing the same elusive outcome. A royal child. A son, preferably. A guarantee of legacy. And with that chase comes a secret world, one you're quickly becoming fluent in. The world of courtly affairs, not the state business your husband handles during long council meetings, but the romantic, whisper-soft underworld that runs beneath every castle wall. The affairs of the heart and body. You've seen the signs, the glances exchanged across a feast table, the lingering hand to waist, the sudden quiet when someone enters the room. It's no secret that kings have mistresses. In fact, it's expected. Adultery is frowned upon for everyone else, but for the monarch, it's almost a masculine accessory, a demonstration of virility. Mistresses are given rooms, dresses and titles. Some are even cousins of noble families, placed near the king deliberately like fruit in reach. And what of you, the queen? You're expected to look the other way. Smile graciously as the latest favourite struts down the corridor wearing jewels that were once yours. It's a bitter daily exercise in restraint, but you learn to survive it. Some queens play the long game, befriending the mistress, converting her into an ally, or quietly undermining her until she's banished. Others simply ignore the whole thing, pouring their focus into the church, their children, or their private rooms where court politics cannot follow. But a rare few, very rare, do something even more scandalous. They take lovers of their own. This is where things get dangerous. A queen's infidelity is treason. Not metaphorically, literally. If you're caught with another man, it's not just a scandal. It's a direct threat to the royal bloodline. Any child you bear must be the king's, or all hell breaks loose. And yet, despite the risk, it happens. Often through elaborate secrecy, hidden passages, and coded notes tucked inside prayer books. It's not about rebellion, not always. Sometimes it's about survival. Queens married to violent, disinterested, or absent kings sometimes found comfort where they could. Let's talk historical fact. Queen Margaret of Anjou, the powerful and polarising wife of Henry VI of England, was plagued by rumours that her son wasn't the king's at all. Henry was considered mentally unstable and possibly impotent, and Margaret spent significant time with a nobleman named Edmund Beaufort. Though there was never hard proof of an affair, the gossip was relentless. Her enemies weaponised it, casting doubt on her son's legitimacy and using it as political ammunition. The crown itself was questioned, because of whispers in the Queen's bedchamber. And that's the danger. One rumour can unravel an entire dynasty. Your every word, glance and sigh become suspicious. Even friendship can be incriminating. So queens learned to be careful. If a lover existed, he had to be silent, trusted and disposable. Sometimes he was a servant, other times a noble cousin, occasionally just a face in the crowd that offered something the crown could not. Affection without an agenda. Now for a fringe fact. In certain courts, especially in late medieval Italy, It was common for powerful women to wear perfume infused with musk or ambergris, not only as a symbol of wealth, but as an aphrodisiac. Some believe the scent stirred passion in those who smelled it. Queens were known to dab a tiny drop behind each ear, then walk past their intended target slowly, letting the scent do the work. This was subtle seduction, royal addition. But let's not pretend this was a romantic escape. The risks were colossal. If you were discovered, there'd be no quiet exile. There'd be a trial, a spectacle, possibly even an execution. The lover would be tortured, likely hanged or drawn and quartered. You would lose everything, your title, your freedom, your life, and yet still the temptation lingered. Because in a world where your body was never truly yours, the idea of choosing even once who touched it, well, that was intoxicating. Here's the scholarly debate. Did medieval queens actually have affairs? Or are most of the stories we've inherited products of misogynistic fear and political propaganda? Historians argue both sides. Some believe these tales were exaggerated to discredit powerful women. Others point to letters, poetry, and suspiciously timed pregnancies as evidence that yes, some queens were bold enough to break the rules. As always, the truth is fogged by centuries of editing, biased chroniclers, and the church's heavy red pen. But back to your present tense. You sit in a cold stone chamber, listening to the soft scratch of a scribe's quill outside your door. A tray of dates and almonds rests untouched by your elbow. One of your ladies is brushing your hair slowly, murmuring about a new merchant who arrived at court. A tall one, she says, with golden eyes and a quiet voice. You pretend not to care, but you notice how her tone changes, how she lingers over the description, how she looks at you in the mirror, one eyebrow barely raised. Later that week, you see him. Just once, in the courtyard unloading silks from a chest. His gaze meets yours, then drops quickly. He bows. Nothing improper, nothing memorable, and yet your pulse speeds up. That's all it takes. A glance, a flicker, dangerous heartbeat. And just like that, you're reminded of what you've had to bury beneath your crown. Your desire. Not lust, necessarily. Just the quiet hunger for intimacy that belongs to you, not the kingdom. You turn away and walk back inside, letting the scent of rosemary and smoke trail after you like a ghost. Because even if nothing ever happens, even if he vanishes from court tomorrow, that moment was real. Yours. And sometimes, in a life where every inch of you is claimed by politics, religion, and history, the smallest secret can feel like freedom. The worst part isn't the waiting, it's the wondering. Because even when nothing happens, no glance, no touch, no whispered rendezvous behind velvet drapes, you're still accused. You learn early that the truth has less power than a well-timed rumour. And in a court thick with incense, egos, and scheming noblemen, the Queen's virtue is always a convenient target. It's invisible, undefendable, and infinitely exploitable, especially in the confessional booth. Every week, sometimes more, depending on how worried your spiritual advisors are, you kneel behind a carved wooden screen and speak into the dark, dry air. The priest listens, or pretends to. It's difficult to tell. You confess your thoughts, your dreams, your lack of dreams. You say that you're praying daily, avoiding forbidden foods, abstaining from pleasure. You say that you love your husband even when he sleeps in another chamber. And still the questions come. Have you harboured impure desires? It's not really a question, it's a net cast into deep water. You're expected to give it something or risk sounding like a liar. I dreamed of him once, you admit, voice barely above a whisper. And you don't have to say who him is. You both know, the merchant, the nobleman, the page boy with the dimple. It doesn't matter. There's always someone the court's been watching you watch. He pauses, then begins his list of penance. A week of silent prayer, fasting on Fridays, no music, and no eye contact with any man below the rank of duke. You nod, accept it, say your prayers. But the shame clings, especially because you know the truth. You haven't done anything, not even close, and yet the guilt is real. Not because you've sinned, but because the entire system is designed to make you feel as if you might have. Queens, more than anyone, are expected to live above temptation. Holier than nuns, yet still attractive enough to justify the king's desire. It's an impossible line to walk, and God help you if you slip. Historical fact for you, Queen Joan Fouappin of Navarre, who married King Philip IV of France, was accused of heresy and sorcery during a politically volatile period. Her connection to the Knights Templar and rumours that she protected certain members led to wild allegations, including that she used enchantments to manipulate her husband's mind. No proof was ever found. But her name was tarnished, and she spent years defending her morality in court and church. And it wasn't just external accusations. Queens were expected to be their own surveillance systems. If you felt a stirring, a curiosity, even a single involuntary dream, you were supposed to confess, because medieval theology didn't draw a clear line between thought and action. Lust, even imagined, was sin, and sin, especially for queens, could spell divine punishment, infertility, illness, plague. Now, for a particularly strange fringe belief. In parts of 12th century Germany and Bohemia, it was thought that the devil visited royal women in their sleep, not as a monstrous creature, but as a seducer, whispering in their dreams, tempting them toward forbidden thoughts. Some queens reportedly tied rosaries around their ankles at night to ward off these spectral visits. Others slept with blessed iron crosses under their pillows, anything to protect the purity of the mind. So what happens when a queen starts to believe the rumours about herself? You begin to retreat. You limit who sees you. You speak less, smile less. You stop playing music in your chambers. You stop requesting your favourite handmaidens. You even stop walking in the garden, afraid that your presence might inspire another whisper. Isolation becomes a kind of armour, and it's heavy. The king may notice, he may not. He's busy with wars, tournaments, mistresses and coin. If he asks what's wrong, you give the usual answers: exhaustion, fasting, the weight of your prayers. You don't say what you're really thinking, that you're starting to feel more symbol than human, more idola than woman, and that every soft part of you is being filed down to something politically acceptable. Here's where the scholarly debate cuts deep. Some argue that the confessor was a queen's ally, a spiritual guide who offered solace in a treacherous court. Others insist he was a spy, in robes, passing your every word to higher powers, the bishop, the chancellor, even the king himself. Evidence exists for both. In some letters, confessors advocated fiercely for their queens. In others, they betrayed them, leaking secrets that fed into formal accusations or private punishments. But regardless of loyalty, the dynamic was always lopsided. You had to confess whether you wanted to or not. And once you did, your sins were recorded, not on parchment, perhaps, but in memory, and used as leverage if ever needed. A little guilt kept queens docile. Too much pride was dangerous. So you carry that guilt like a shadow. It follows you through mass, through banquets, through long nights alone in your chamber. You pray harder. You wear darker gowns. You begin fasting without being asked. You accept penances before they're even assigned. And still the court's curiosity remains unsatisfied. They say you've grown colder. They say your eyes look sharp. They say you've lost your beauty to piety. But what they never ask is why. Why does a queen, born into opulence and dressed in silk, begin to act like a woman on trial? 'Cause she is. Always. And sometimes, just sometimes, you wonder what would happen if you stopped pretending, if you let go of the image and became what they already suspect, a creature of desire, unrepentant and dangerous. What would they do then? Strip your crown, banish you, burn your name in the pages of history? Maybe. Or maybe for one single night you'd feel free. But for now, you press your lips shut, kneel again, and begin your next prayer. The words taste familiar, hollow, but you speak them anyway. Because queens do not scream, they whisper. There are herbs in your chamber that weren't there before. You notice them the way a hunter notices a snapped twig, quietly, instinctively. A small bundle tied with red thread hangs behind your curtain rod, where the sunlight barely touches. Another has been tucked under your pillow by one of your ladies, who insists it helps with dreams. You don't ask what's in them, you already know. Mugwort, vervain, crushed pomegranate seeds. The usual suspects. Aphrodisiacs, fertility charms, love potions. They go by many names, but in this palace they're simply called remedies. Because when prayers fail, you turn to plants. The women who bring them to you speak softly and always glance over their shoulders. These aren't court-sanctioned midwives with clean hands and holy amulets. These are the ones who come from the kitchens, the laundry rooms, the stables. Women who've seen things, who whisper about ancient recipes passed down by mothers and crones. You let them come because nothing else has worked. You've gone to every mass, you've lit every candle, and still your belly is silent. So you drink the tea they give you. Bitter, of course. Everything good for fertility tastes like spoiled bark and regret. You pretend not to gag. The woman watches your face, then nods once, satisfied, and says, You'll feel something tonight. Warmth in the belly, that's how you'll know. You do feel something later. Warmth, yes, but also shame, because even as you lie in bed beneath a canopy painted with angels and saints, you wonder if this counts as sin. The church hasn't exactly given you a clear answer. On one hand, you're fulfilling your duty. On the other, you're meddling in God's design. Magic or medicine? The line is thin, invisible even. You choose not to ask. Queens rarely get answers they like. Historical fact, in 14th century France, Queen Joanna of Bourbon was known to consume blessed tonics, made from fennel and powdered deer antler, a practice recommended by her physician to encourage conception. Though officially approved by the church, these tonics had roots in ancient pagan remedies. Churchmen grumbled. The Queen continued anyway. She bore several children, though most died young. The tonics kept coming. And then there are the stranger things. A charm carved into bone and sewn into your underdress. A vial of tears, your own, collected after a night of disappointment and stored beneath your bed. A charm that instructs you to speak the name of a child you lost before sleeping. You never had a child. But you name him anyway. In your mind, you see him with your hair and your husband's nose playing near a fountain that doesn't exist. You whisper the name into the dark. No one hears. But maybe someone does. Here's a fringe fact. In some corners of medieval Spain, it was believed that placing a spoon of honey beneath the tongue before lovemaking would ensure conception. Not because of biology, but because bees were thought to be sacred messengers between the earthly and divine. Some queens went further, anointing their thighs with warm honey before bed. No records say whether it worked, but the image lingers, doesn't it? You learn quickly that not all potions are created equal. Some are meant to rouse the body, others to rouse the mind. A particular vial, milky and sweet-smelling, is meant to stir desire itself. Not fertility, not love, just pure, uncut want. You stare at it on your nightstand for days before finally dipping your finger in and tasting it. The sensation is strange, almost electric. You feel your skin flush. For the first time in months, you touch your own wrist and feel something like hunger. This brings you to a problem you didn't expect. What if you want to want? Not out of duty, but for yourself. That thought is dangerous. You are raised to view sex as sacred, functionally, restrained. To perform it with grace, silence, and maybe a tearful prayer afterward. But now, with your body tingling from a potion brewed by someone named Isolde, who only has 3 teeth, you begin to wonder what it's like to desire without a gender. To reach not for lineage, but for release. That's when the guilt creeps in again. You go to chapel more. You ask your confessor if longing, even alone, is a sin. He responds with a parable about sheep. You nod, you understand nothing, but it doesn't matter. The damage is done. The question has already grown roots. Here's the scholarly debate for tonight. Were these aphrodisiacs actually effective, or did belief make them so? Some historians argue that these tonics had real physiological effects. Many herbs used did contain compounds that influenced hormone levels, digestion, even mood. Others argue that the power was purely placebo, that the ritual, the preparation, the secrecy, the candlelight was what stirred the mind and body. Either way, queens believed in them, because belief, especially for women denied knowledge, was often the only medicine they had. Back in your chamber, the fire has burned low. You sit in your bath, warm water lapping at your collarbones, and think about the next brew you've been offered. This one is more serious, less romantic. It's a concoction meant to clear the womb, a phrase that might mean cleanse or destroy depending on context. You stare at the vial, you ask no questions, you leave it unopened, for now, and as you lie in bed, the soft fur of the coverlet brushing your arms, you feel the magic thick in the air. Not flashy or dramatic, just the slow humming presence of hope shaped by desperation. You've learned by now that in a palace where every physician is a puppet and every priest a spy, sometimes the real healers wear rags and speak in half rhymes. So you drink and you wait, and in the morning, when the world starts spinning again, bells ringing, maids whispering, the court breathing down your neck, you'll smile as though it's all under control, as though the herbs aren't pulsing in your veins, as though you're just a pious, obedient wife and not a woman who just may have tasted a little freedom in the form of rosemary and root. The next morning your chamber smells faintly of dried citrus peel and something darker, clove maybe. The fire's died to soft embers. You're wrapped in a wool robe, hair still damp from your bath, and your body hums with a strange quiet. Not excitement, not fear, just the awareness that something has shifted, if only slightly. Maybe it's the herbs, maybe it's your own mind rebelling in small quiet ways. You no longer flinch when your ladies place something unknown on your breakfast tray. You no longer ask questions, you've surrendered just enough to this new rhythm, this steady, bizarre blend of folklore and formality. But even in surrender, you have structure, and that structure includes the stars. Yes, the stars, those flickering gods of medieval astrology. You see, royal sex wasn't just spiritual, political, or physical, it was celestial. There were entire schools of thought dedicated to tracking planetary alignments before deciding the best time for conception. It's not quite as romantic as it sounds. In fact, it's more like medical scheduling. The court astrologer would examine your charts, calculate your humours, compare your birth hour to your husband's, and declare, with theatrical gravity, that Tuesday at dusk was your moment. You laugh the first time you hear it. Tuesday at dusk, as if you're a chicken being coaxed to lay. But your ladies don't laugh, they nod. They rearrange the evening's schedule. They bring you a new shift, freshly laundered. They add cinnamon and mint to your bathwater. One of them even burns bay leaves and mutters a Latin chant under her breath. You begin to wonder if they believe this more than you do. Historical fact: Catherine de' Medici, one of the most powerful queens of Renaissance France, kept a personal astrologer, Cosimo Ruggieri, who helped schedule her husband's movements, meals, and even bedroom visits. He reportedly advised her not to conceive during an eclipse, warning it could produce a dark child, physically or morally. She followed his guidance obsessively, sometimes postponing intercourse for weeks to wait for an auspicious alignment. Whether she believed it or just needed something to control, no one knows. Your court isn't quite that theatrical, but it has its moments. One evening, as the sun sets into a warm orange blur beyond the stained glass windows, your astrologer appears with your conception window. That's the term they use. A window, not an opportunity. It makes it sound like a tiny portal you might miss if you blink too slowly. The window is brief, 2 hours. That's all. You're bathed, perfumed, rubbed down with scented oils that cling to your skin like memories. The servants pull the bed drapes tight and place small icons, saints mostly, on the mantel above your fireplace. You notice St. Anne staring back at you, her painted face solemn, unreadable. You wonder if she's judging, or if she remembers what it felt like to want something so badly and not know if it would ever come. Your husband arrives on time, surprisingly. He smells of wine and sage and a little like the stables. The astrologer leaves. The maids vanish. For once, it's just the two of you. And still, it feels crowded. Not with people, but with expectations, with the weight of calculated desire. It's hard to say whether the astrology helps. The act itself is brief, mechanical, not unpleasant, but not memorable. You close your eyes and imagine the stars overhead, cold, indifferent witnesses. When it's over, your husband kisses your cheek and leaves without a word. You lie still for exactly 40 minutes as instructed. You're not supposed to move. You're not supposed to speak. Just breathe and hope. Here's a fringe fact to chew on. In some medieval courts, couples were advised to face specific directions during sex. South, if you wanted a son. North, if you were hoping for a wise child. East for beauty. West for fertility. Some beds were even built on rotating platforms to accommodate these rituals. You haven't asked your carpenter for one yet, but you've thought about it. There's a scholarly debate about all this, of course. Did queens actually believe astrology could influence conception? Or was it just a polite way to manage a difficult subject? Something that gave structure to the impossible? Some argue that astrology provided emotional comfort, a sense of order in a deeply chaotic process. Others say it was theatre, plain and simple, used to placate the court and distract from medical ignorance. Either way, the rituals stuck. Back in your chamber, time slows again. You watch the fire, now fully rekindled, and you listen to the soft creak of the castle settling. You wonder if anything happened. You wonder if those 2 hours mattered. You wonder if the stars noticed you at all. The next morning, the court is buzzing. Not because of you yet, but because someone else's wife has given birth. A duchess. Her fourth child, a boy. You're expected to visit her chambers, deliver a gift, offer congratulations. You do, gracefully. But inside, something clenches. Not out of envy exactly, though it brushes against envy's edges, but out of fear. What if this never happens for you? What if you're remembered not for your lineage, but for your failure? At dinner that night, your husband toasts the Duchess's health. He says nothing about the 2 hours you shared the night before. And why would he? It's not romance. It's a schedule. You nod politely. Sip your wine. You know better than to show disappointment. Later, your handmaid leaves a small scroll on your pillow. Your next conception window is 10 days away. The moon will be waxing. Venus in Pisces. Excellent for passion, less excellent for sons. You don't know what to make of that, but you mark the date anyway. What else can you do? And in the quiet after midnight, long after the candles have burned down to stubs, you step out onto your balcony. The stars are there, sharp and bright and cold. You stare at them until your eyes blur, and you wonder, not for the first time, if they're watching you, or laughing. You begin to notice things, subtle, quiet, half-formed immediate patterns that probably mean nothing, but still you notice. The way your stomach turns slightly when you smell fish, the way your breasts feel a little heavier, the way your sleep has deepened into long, velvet black hours where dreams come thick and fast. You don't tell anyone, not yet, not even your most trusted maid. You let the thoughts simmer quietly, like soup left on a hearth to thicken. This might be something, or it might be nothing again. Your ladies, of course, begin to suspect on their own. They watch your appetite, the flush in your cheeks, how often you pause while walking. They start slipping extra cushions behind your back, offering you water without being asked. The word quickened hasn't been spoken yet, but it's hovering at the edges of every conversation. You feel it in the way they glance at you sideways, as if any sudden movement might scare the possibility away. Still you wait. You know better than to say the words too soon. The king, for his part, is oblivious, or pretending to be. He visits you more often, but always with the same practiced detachment. 10 minutes of polite conversation, followed by the smell of wine and damp wool trailing in his wake. He asks about your health with the kind of vague concern a man shows for a favoured horse. You smile, nod, and answer with what he wants to hear. All is well, your majesty. Always, your majesty, never anything warmer. And then one morning it happens. A flutter. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. Like a fish turning in your belly. You freeze, press a hand just below your ribs. There it is again. You don't cry, but your breath hitches in your throat. You stay very still for a long time, as if afraid that moving will make it stop. When it doesn't, when the flutter comes again, you exhale slowly and begin to plan what happens next. Historical fact. When Queen Isabella of France first announced her pregnancy in 1312, her chamber was immediately sealed to outsiders. The court declared her divinely occupied, a phrase used to mark the Queen as holy and off-limits. Every object she touched was catalogued. Her food was prepared under supervision from both a bishop and the royal physician. And for 6 months she did not leave her chamber, save for walks in the garden, accompanied by no fewer than 12 guards. The child she bore, Edward III, would go on to become one of England's most famous kings. For you, the transformation is more gradual. At first, your ladies begin to braid your hair differently, looser, softer styles meant to keep the mind gentle. Then come the ribbons, all in blue, the traditional colour of divine protection. Musicians begin playing gentler melodies in your presence. The court speaks more quietly when you enter a room. Meals are served earlier. The very tempo of the palace bends around you subtly, like grass beneath the wind. You're not just a queen now. You're a vessel, a miracle, a living, breathing sign that God favours this kingdom. And this child, still the size of a walnut, is already more important than you. And yet beneath all the reverence lies a thick layer of superstition. You're warned not to sew, lest you stitch the child's soul shut. You're forbidden from looking at fire too long. Some believe it scars the unborn. No garlic, no mutton, no handling anything sharp. A midwife, stern and tight-lipped, ties a cord of white wool around your wrist. You must not remove it until the baby cries. Fringe fact. In parts of 13th century northern Europe, queens were given small stones called womb warmers, smooth pieces of amber or quartz kept tucked beneath the bed or under pillows. They were believed to guard against miscarriage, especially during the first trimester. Some queens took them so seriously they refused to sleep in any chamber without one, even if it meant delaying royal travel for days. As your belly grows, so does the anxiety. You're aware every day of how fragile this moment is. One wrong step, one spoiled meal, one sudden fright, and it could all end. Miscarriage isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a national crisis. It's also ammunition for your enemies. If the child is lost, there will be whispers that you did something wrong, that your womb was too cold, that you let dark thoughts in, that you failed. The scholarly debate here is especially brutal. Historians argue over whether queens were treated as sacred during pregnancy, or imprisoned. On one side they were protected, pampered, exalted. On the other, they were isolated, micromanaged, stripped of agency. Even their movements were decided by others. Letters from the 15th century describe queens crying behind closed doors because they were denied access to books, music, or even the window views during the lying-in period. Everything was done for the child, never for the woman. You see this beginning in your own chambers. Your favourite servant is quietly dismissed. Too chatty, they say. Your wine is replaced with bitter herbal mixtures. You're allowed no visitors without a written note from the bishop or the royal physician. Even your husband, now suddenly interested, comes only when escorted by 2 witnesses. Nothing about this feels like celebration. It feels like containment. But you endure it. Because now, when you walk through the gardens in your softest slippers, with your fingers resting just below your navel, you feel that flutter again. Stronger now. Less fish. More drumbeat. A steady pulse that belongs to someone new. Someone forming in secret. Someone powerful. And you know, just as every queen before you knew, that this child, this invisible life, is your only true insurance. Your only unshakable leverage. Everything else, your beauty, your influence, your diplomacy, can be taken from you. But this is yours. And for the first time in months, maybe years, you feel something close to peace, or at least purpose. You've survived the marriage, the bedding, the guilt, the confessions, the prayers, the herbs, the stars. Now you are building a future, quietly, inch by inch, within yourself. Your body becomes a battleground, not of swords and banners, but of expectations. Everyone has an opinion about what you should eat, how you should sleep, what songs you should hear, even what direction your bed should face. Your midwives tell you not to laugh too hard, it could jar the baby. Your confessor says you must avoid carnal thoughts, as they might mark the child with lust. The palace steward insists you avoid wind, as it carries illness. And the court astrologer warns you not to look at the moon during certain phases. It could confuse the womb, he says solemnly, as if the moon and your uterus are engaged in some secret duel. You smile, nod and obey for the most part. But inside you're exhausted. Not just from the weight of your belly, which grows heavier by the day, but from the way your every moment is supervised. You can't sneeze without 3 ladies in waiting glancing sideways, wondering if that's a bad omen. You can't shift in your seat without someone asking, was that a kick? Your privacy, so what little was left, is gone entirely. This is what it means to be a queen in the final months of pregnancy. You are no longer a woman, you're a shrine. There is ceremony now in everything you do. When you wake, the bells are rung. When you walk through the gardens, musicians play slow, soothing melodies are said to bless the child's temperament. Your meals are announced as if they are offerings. Every dish is sampled by a servant first. Nothing is left to chance. Not because they love you, but because what grows inside you is more important than you ever were. Here's a historical fact. During her 3rd pregnancy, Queen Philippa of Hainault, wife of Edward III, was assigned a private choir to sing to her belly each morning. The belief was that the child would develop greater intelligence and a more harmonious nature if exposed to sacred music in the womb. She reportedly listened to the same 6 hymns daily, refusing to let anyone change the order, lest it confuse the baby's spirit. You begin to wonder what kind of person your child will become, not in the romantic modern sense, but in the deeply strategic medieval sense. Will they be strong, wise, fertile? You know that the moment they are born, they'll become a piece on the same chessboard you've lived on all your life. If it's a girl, she'll be married off by the age of 12, likely to someone twice her age. If it's a boy, he'll be trained in politics, war, and maybe, if he's lucky, compassion. You whisper prayers at night that your child will be loved for something other than power. But even as you do, you know that's a luxury few royals are ever granted. Here's a fringe fact for you. In medieval Hungary, queens were advised to keep a live rabbit in their chambers during pregnancy, not as a pet, but as a mirror creature. The rabbit's health, mood and behaviour were closely watched as an omen for the child's future temperament. If the rabbit was calm, the child would be calm. If it died suddenly, panic spread. You've never kept a rabbit. But after hearing the tale, you start to look nervously at the palace cats. Are they a reflection? Are you inviting bad luck by letting one curl against your belly? This is the kind of logic you find yourself slipping into, not because you believe in omens, but because they give shape to the shapeless fear. Fear of miscarriage, fear of stillbirth, fear of giving birth to a child who won't survive the year, or worse, survive long enough to be used and broken by the very system that once used and broke you. The scholarly debate surrounding these final weeks is fascinating and brutal. Some historians claim that queens were given the best medical care available at the time: trained midwives, herbal remedies, skilled physicians. Others argue that royal births were nightmarish spectacles, overseen by clergymen more concerned with ceremony than safety. The truth likely sits somewhere in between. What's undeniable is that the final month was cloaked in ritual. You've now entered the period known as lying in, a term that makes it sound restful. It's not. You're confined to your chamber, forbidden from public appearance. The windows are covered with thick drapes to protect against evil light. You're not allowed to see strangers. Not even letters from foreign courts are brought to you, lest bad news rattle your wee womb. For all your status, you might as well be a nun in cloister. Even your clothing changes. No more corsets, no more embroidered gowns. You wear loose shifts of linen and wool dyed in pale colours meant to calm the mind. Jewellery is discouraged, except for a single cross. You are dressed like a vessel, a relic waiting to be cracked open. The only people allowed near you now are your midwives, your most trusted ladies, and occasionally the chaplain. He recites psalms at your bedside in the evenings, hands raised like a conductor, lips always moving. Sometimes you pretend not to hear him. You close your eyes and drift into dreams where you are no one. Not a queen, not a mother, not a symbol, just a body floating in still water. But even in this so-called stillness, the palace is preparing. Cradles are carved, astrologers draft horoscopes for every possible birth hour. Nurses are hired, wet nurses too. You haven't been asked your opinion on that. You know better than to hope they'll let you nurse the child yourself. That's not your role. You're here to deliver the air, not raise them. And yet, as the kicks grow stronger, you find yourself reaching for a connection that court protocol has tried so hard to keep at bay. You talk to the child, in whispers, late at night, with your hands resting on your round belly. You tell them stories of your homeland. You hum lullabies you barely remember. You promise things you may never be able to give. Safety, love, freedom, a life not shaped by fear. Maybe they hear you, maybe not. But the sound of your own voice speaking to someone who hasn't arrived yet soothes something in you. Because even if this child never knows the world beyond walls and expectations, maybe, just maybe, they'll carry your voice inside them. A small steady echo of something human. The night before the birth feels like a pause in the universe. The castle is hushed, as if holding its breath. Even the wind outside seems to move more cautiously, brushing against the shutters instead of howling like it usually does. In your chamber, candles burn low and steady. The sheets have been changed 3 times today. The fire has been stoked and watched as though it's some ancient god that demands constant tending. The midwives sit silently on low stools, stitching or spinning, pretending they're not glancing at you every other minute. They are. You lie in bed, surrounded by the quiet clutter of holy relics and herbal sachets, fragments of both science and superstition. The carved figure of St. Margaret of Antioch, protector of pregnant women, has been placed above the headboard. You've stared at her so long you can now trace her features with your eyes closed. Delicate nose, downturned mouth, dragon at her feet. She's always shown standing on the dragon she supposedly burst from. A strange story to cling to, but what else do you have? It's hard not to envy a woman who survived being swallowed whole. Your contractions start just before dawn. Small at first, low, dull tugs that come and go, like waves licking the shore. You don't say anything at first, not out of bravery, but caution. You've heard the horror stories about false labours and overzealous midwives who start boiling water and ringing bells too early. So you breathe through it. Wait. Time the pain by the drip of wax from the candle near your elbow. But when the second wave hits harder, sharper, deeper, a muscle twisting with purpose, you speak. One word, quiet. The midwives rise instantly, and from there everything moves in strange, jerking slow motion. One rushes to the door to summon the bishop, another begins laying clean cloths on the floor, a third checks your pulse and begins murmuring a chant under her breath. Not a Latin prayer, but something older. You think you catch the word iron, maybe salt. You don't ask, you don't want to know. Historical fact. In many royal courts across Europe, the birthing room was treated almost like a chapel. Only women were allowed in, unless the birth took a dire turn. Then, and only then, might a priest or male physician be summoned. The rest of the time, it was a world ruled entirely by women, midwives, maids and mothers. They would salt the corners of the room, light beeswax candles, and sometimes smear protective herbs along the threshold to keep evil spirits out. Queens, for a few hours, became something beyond class or title. They became vessels of awe, terror and pain. As the contractions deepen, the pain blooms like fire, hot and raw, centered in your hips but radiating through your ribs, your thighs, your spine. You cry out, not elegantly, not like a queen, but like any woman trying to push life out of her body. Your hair sticks to your face, your back arches. You feel yourself slipping in and out of awareness, drifting through a fog of agony. Someone places a damp cloth on your forehead, someone else holds your hand, another midwife, young, unfamiliar, kneels near your belly and murmurs, "Almost there, almost, just one more push, Your Majesty." You want to scream at her, not because she's wrong, but because the phrase "just one more" has already been said 6 times. But then, through the blinding light behind your eyes, the tightest grip of pain, you feel it. Movement, slipping, the weight changing, something in you gives, and then the room changes. There is a cry, not yours, a new voice, small, gasping, wailing like a storm that's just remembered it can rage. The baby is lifted, wrapped, rubbed clean. The cord is cut, and before you can even form the thought, the child is placed in your arms. It's real, warm, red, angry at the world already. It's a boy. The room exhales as one. Somewhere beyond the thick curtains, a bell begins to ring. First one, then another. Down in the chapel, the priests fall to their knees in a prayer they've rehearsed for months. The court steward will be drafting letters before your afterbirth is even delivered. Ambassadors will ride out by midday. The kingdom has an heir. And you look down into that flushed, wrinkled face and feel 1,000 things at once. Exhaustion, relief, disbelief, awe. But most of all, you feel something terrifying in its simplicity. Love. Not the abstract love you were told to feel. Not duty, not pride, not divine obligation. Real, gut-deep animal love. This isn't just a child, he's yours. Fringe fact. In some medieval traditions, a small morsel of bread soaked in wine was rubbed against a newborn's lips before their first feeding. It was thought to protect them from illness and link them spiritually to the Eucharist. In one record, a bishop protested the practice, saying it blurred the lines between faith and folklore. The mother reportedly insisted anyway. It was her only defiance. Here's the scholarly debate tonight. Were royal births private miracles or public performances? Some historians argue that they were deeply personal, cloaked in privacy, guided by ancient female knowledge. Others claim they were deliberately staged, an audience of noble women and midwives ensuring the legitimacy of the child. In some cases, the birth was witnessed by dozens. In others, no one saw anything but the aftermath. The truth, again, is murky. Records were shaped by politics, but there's no denying that your birth, this birth, was both sacred and strategic. After the cord is cut and the child weighed, he's taken from you, not stolen, not forever, but lifted from your arms and brought to the chapel for blessing. You barely notice. You drift into sleep before they even cross the threshold. Your last thought is not of banners or thrones or future marriages. It's not even of your husband. It's of a heartbeat. Once fluttering under your ribs, now alive, and screaming into the world. And somehow, impossibly, everything has changed. You're no longer just a queen, you're a mother. The world is different now, not in the sweeping, poetic way people talk about after wars or revolutions, but in small, disorienting ways, like someone quietly rearranged your life while you were sleeping. You wake in a room that looks the same, but every object has a new purpose. The pitcher of water is for you, not for washing. The folded cloth on the table is not a towel, it's for when the baby is brought to nurse. The incense in the corner isn't for prayer, but to mask the afterbirth smell still faintly lingering in the walls. And your body, oh, your body, is no longer an ornament or a vessel. It's a battlefield. It aches, it leaks, it stings. You are hollowed out and now you're expected to smile. The first few days blur together in a haze of bleeding, whispering and hushed celebrations. There are bells ringing across the kingdom, proclamations being read in marketplaces, and children tossing coins into the air like the world has been reset. But in your chamber, it's quiet. Too quiet. The baby has been taken to the wet nurse. You asked to see him, but they said, he's being settled. That phrase means nothing and everything. Settled where? With whom? Is he sleeping, screaming, swaddled in silk or rough cloth? No one tells you. You rest because there's nothing else to do. You lie in bed while women murmur around you, changing linens, spooning broth into your mouth, adjusting pillows. Your husband visits briefly. He doesn't hold your hand, but he praises your strength. A son, he says with the pride of a man who did most of the work. A fine boy. You nod, lips dry, breasts tender, aching to be touched or emptied, or something. He kisses your forehead, more like a ritual than affection, and leaves before you can ask for the baby again. Here's a historical fact that might twist your stomach a little. Royal mothers in many medieval courts were not permitted to see their child for the first week, sometimes longer. It was said to preserve their strength and protect the child's health. In practice, it distanced mother from baby early, ensuring that the infant's care and future loyalties remained firmly in the hands of wet nurses, governesses, and tutors. The queen, she was there to make the child, not raise it. You try not to think about this when you close your eyes. You dream of small fingers curling around yours, of breath like warm milk, of laughter echoing through sunlit rooms. When you wake, there's the silence again. Someone places a bowl of stewed pears beside your bed. You eat out of obligation, sweetness turns sour on your tongue, and then finally, after days of being settled, he is brought to you, not carried but wheeled in a cradle carved from oak inlaid with ivory. The nurse lifts him gently, presents him like a gift you already gave yourself. You reach for him with trembling arms. He's heavier than you imagined, realer, warmer, a small, serious face, nose crinkled, mouth opening like a newborn bird. You hold him against your chest and something inside you cracks open, not in pain, in recognition. This is yours. Despite the court, despite the kingdom, despite the rules and rituals and walls, they can't take this moment. You hum without meaning to. He blinks up at you unimpressed. You laugh, which makes you wince, and tears spring to your eyes with no real warning. A maid rushes over with a cloth, assuming something's wrong. You shake your head and wave her off. She doesn't understand that joy and grief can live in the same breath. Fringe fact. There are records of queens secretly nursing their own babies in the middle of the night, despite orders to use a wet nurse exclusively. It was considered inappropriate, even dangerous, for royal women to feed their children. Too animal, too intimate, too earthy. But some ignored that, sneaking out of bed under cover of darkness, dismissing their ladies and holding their child to their own breast. It wasn't rebellion exactly, it was reclamation. And maybe, as you sit with your son now, just the two of you, you begin to understand that not every act of power is loud. Some are as quiet as a heartbeat against skin, as soft as breath on a mother's neck. The scholarly debate around postpartum queens is complicated. Were they pampered and protected, or isolated and controlled? Some records speak of lying-in periods full of luxury, foot rubs, perfume sheets, endless songs. Others describe something closer to confinement, a kind of house arrest dressed up in silk. The reality likely depends on the queen, her rank, her favour, and the whims of the men around her. But what's clear is that regardless of treatment, the mother's role ended or transformed drastically the moment the child drew breath. You know this, and so you start preparing, not for war, but for strategy. You begin tracking who is given access to your child, who holds him, who speaks about him in court. You listen closely when nurses whisper in corners. You take note of every cough, every fever, every suggestion that he resembles the king just so, as if that's the only acceptable outcome. This is your new court game. You've played many before: seduction, survival, silence. Now you're playing motherhood, and it's just as political, just as dangerous. You also start to see the cracks in the palace's painted smile. Some nobles are disappointed it wasn't a girl, easier to marry off. Others mutter about omens, birthmarks, the position of Mars the night he was born. There's always someone ready to find fault, but you keep your expression smooth. Let them guess, let them worry. Because they don't know what you know, that your child is strong, that you saw it in the way his fingers curled around yours like he already understood what it meant to hold on. You don't sleep much anymore, but that's expected. What they don't expect is how alert you are in your sleeplessness. How quietly you're gathering power again, not through your body, but through this child. Every decision that affects him must now pass through you, and slowly, steadily, they're beginning to realise it. Motherhood, it turns out, is the one role you weren't trained for, and somehow it's the one you're best at. You once thought love and desire were like threads, separate, done tidy, manageable if you kept them from tangling. But now, days after childbirth, with your body still aching in places too deep to name, you start to see the truth. It's all a mess. A sprawling tapestry of instinct and exhaustion, pain and longing, woven together with crooked fingers and sleepless nights. And in that mess, you begin to revisit a curious lie you were told for most of your life, that royal love is beautiful, elegant, something like poetry read aloud in a garden. It isn't. Not in the stories you were raised on, not in the verses passed down through velvet-covered manuscripts and sung at feasts. Those were the tales of courtly love, a kind of medieval fantasy genre unto itself, where knights ached for queens from afar and chaste kisses were more sacred than consummated passion. The idea was simple. Love should be impossible, or at the very least, inconvenient. These stories painted queens as holy objects, untouchable, unknowable, draped in silks and mystery. Their lovers, always noble and doomed, existed only to pine, to serve, to compose poetry by moonlight and die tragically in a battle. Real medieval queens, however, were far more practical. You know that now. You live that now. You've seen what love actually looks like. A tired smile from a maid who brings you water in the middle of the night. The weight of your child in your arms as he refuses to sleep. The stiffness in your legs as you rise anyway. And the sex? Please! You're lucky if it didn't end with a prayer of apology or a quick trip to confession. Let's talk historical fact. The concept of fin amour, or refined love, exploded across medieval Europe in the 12th century, especially in courts like Eleanor of Aquitaine's. It emphasised longing over consummation. The queen was often placed on a pedestal, not as a woman, but a symbol. Lovers swore fealties to her as they would a lord. This made great music. It made terrible marriages. In practice, courtly love had little to do with real relationships. It was a social game, a dance of glances and verse, with strict rules and even stricter consequences if taken too far. You were meant to inspire desire, not fulfill it, and if you dared cross that invisible line from fantasy into flesh. Suddenly the love turned scandalous. Suddenly you weren't a muse anymore, you were a whore, an adulteress, a danger to the realm. Sound familiar? The irony, of course, is that your court is still obsessed with this nonsense. Minstrels sing ballads of tragic queens who loved knights they could never touch. Young noblewomen pass around torn pages of romances, memorising the lines as if they're prayers. Even your husband has recited a few to you, usually after too much wine. Always the same kind of story, the lonely queen, the chaste kiss, the tragic death. No diapers, no morning sickness, no blood on the bedsheets. You once tried to play that game, smiling subtly across the hall, dropping a handkerchief, laughing at a joke that wasn't funny. And what did it get you? 2 hours of guilt in the chapel, and 3 days of whispers that you were too friendly with the cousin of a visiting count. That cousin, for the record, had a lisp and body odour that could stun livestock. You weren't interested, you were being polite. But that's the problem with these stories. They raise expectations that no real woman, certainly no queen, can ever meet. You're supposed to be untouched and untouchable, but also desirable, but also obedient, but also strong, but not too strong. A man can write you a poem and have it sung under your window, but if you write him back, you're suddenly dangerous. If you sigh, it's interpreted. If you breathe too deeply, someone will say you swooned. Fringe fact. Some noble women in 14th century France wrote their own versions of courtly poems under pseudonyms. A few were surprisingly bold, flipping the script, mocking the absurdity of noble longing, and even suggesting that female desire was not just real, but unruly. One poem begins, If your love is pain, then I am a dagger. Needless to say, those verses were not recited at court. You begin to reflect on your own experience, on how many times you've smiled at a man who expected you to be an ideal rather than a person, how often you've been told that your grace is inspiring by men who couldn't remember the colour of your eyes, how many times you've been kissed not out of affection, but for appearances. It makes you question everything, even your own memories. Were you ever really in love? Was that flutter in your chest real, or just a story you were trying to live inside? There's a scholarly debate that mirrors this dilemma. Did medieval queens internalise courtly love ideals, or did they mock them behind closed doors? Some historians believe queens used the romantic language of the day to manipulate perception, to gain power through illusion. Others argue that even powerful women were swept up in the fantasy, their desires shaped by the same poems that reduced them to statues in gardens. You suspect both are true, that you too once longed to be longed for, that you imagined the right words, the right look, could make someone see you not as a political obligation but as a woman. And when that didn't happen, you learnt to twist the fantasy in your favour. Now, sitting at your window, nursing soreness in your joints and a newborn in your lap, you feel something like clarity. You don't need a poem. You don't want to be a symbol. You want peace, maybe companionship, someone who sees the stretch marks, the dark circles, the quiet anger in your voice and doesn't flinch. Someone who doesn't mistake your silence for grace, or your resilience for indifference. You don't know if such a person exists in your court. Probably not, but the realization itself is liberating, because it means you can stop performing, at least in private. So the next time a troubadour sings of queens with golden hair and eyes like moonlit sorrow, you will smile, but only with your mouth, not your heart, not anymore, because you know what those songs leave out: the sweat, the silence, the strength, and the truth that sometimes the queen doesn't want a knight. She wants the room to breathe. It begins with paper, thin cream-coloured vellum, rolled tightly and sealed in wax bearing your husband's insignia. You recognise it immediately, not the content, but the ritual. This is a consummation contract, and though it seems ridiculous now with your child already squirming in your arms, it's a necessary formality, or so they say. You unfold it slowly, hand steady, eyes scanning the tight script with practiced boredom. It confirms that your marriage was fulfilled, your body has done its duty, and most importantly, your child is legitimate. The irony, of course, is that no one cared about your consent during the actual act, but your signature now, after the blood, the labour, the pain, is somehow essential. This is what happens when power is measured in wombs. You sign your name without blinking, a quill dipped in iron gall ink. Your hand aches a little, still stiff from the weeks of bed rest, but you press the pen down harder than you need to, leaving a dark splotch behind. A small rebellion, barely worth noticing, but it's yours. The steward bows, retrieves the parchment and disappears down the corridor. It will be stored in the Royal Archive, along with hundreds of others just like it. Proof that you were properly deflowered, impregnated and tethered to the kingdom by the bonds of biology and bureaucracy. Here's your historical fact for the night. In many European courts, particularly in Spain and parts of France, it was customary for royal marriages to be followed by written declarations, contracts attesting to the consummation of the union. Sometimes these were signed by the couple, other times by witnesses. In rare cases, the bedclothes themselves were examined, then sealed in wax and archived. One account from the 15th century describes a queen signing her contract with trembling hands while still bleeding from the birth. Dignity wasn't part of the process, and yes, your contract includes the words "without coercion." You almost laugh when you read that, not out loud, but inside there's a ripple of something between sarcasm and exhaustion. Without coercion, as if the pressure of an entire kingdom doesn't count. Still, the document does what it was meant to. It solidifies your child's claim. No one can challenge your son's right to the throne now, not without tearing the pages from the Royal Archive and lighting them on fire in front of the cathedral. Which has happened. You've read about it. But let's be honest, it's not just about paperwork. The contract is a symbol, a final flourish on the myth of royal purity. It tells the world that you followed the script, that everything unfolded as it should, that your body was a compliant vessel, that the union was sacred, and no one needs to know about the pain, the disinterest, the herbs, the calculations, the long cold nights you spent wondering if you were broken. What matters is that the kingdom believes you were loved. There's a fringe detail here that might amuse you. In some medieval Italian city-states, brides were given a symbolic key after signing the consummation contract. Not to a house, but to the city itself. It represented the idea that her womb had opened the gates to political alliance. One queen was even depicted in a tapestry with a key hanging from her waist, alongside a coiled serpent and an open book. Interpret that however you'd like. You sit now in your chamber, the air smelling faintly of old ink and dried rose petals. Your son is sleeping in a small cradle beside the hearth. You watch him breathe, tiny chest rising and falling. You wonder if he'll ever understand what was done in his name, what you had to give up to make his existence acceptable. Not that he'll be ungrateful, but that's not the point. The point is that the story of his birth will follow him for the rest of his life, and yours. It will be told at feasts, it will be used in treaties, it will be repeated and rewritten and embroidered onto tapestries, and not a word of it will mention what really happened. Not the way your stomach cramped for 3 days before the labour, not the way the midwife whispered apologies between contractions, not the strange mix of pride and grief you felt when the nurse took your child away before you'd even had a chance to speak his name aloud. That's why the contract exists, to tell a cleaner story. Here's the scholarly debate for tonight. Were these consummation contracts legal necessities or just ceremonial theatre? Some argue that they served a genuine purpose in preventing disputed successions, especially in kingdoms with unstable lines of inheritance. Others say they were symbolic gestures meant to assure the court and the church that everything was holy and orderly. In reality, they were probably both, a blend of law and performance, truth and illusion. You begin to notice how many things in your life fall into that same blend. The prayers you recite before bed, half faith, half habit. The crown on your head, half besame burden a soulmate and half armour. Even your smile in court, half sincerity, half survival. You start to see your whole role as queen as a kind of layered fiction, curated for those who need it to be real. But in this quiet moment, you allow yourself to feel what the contract cannot record. The weight of your son in your arms, the heat of the fire at your back, the slight tremble still lingering in your thighs weeks after labour. The strange calm that comes from knowing you've done something impossible. Twice. Once by carrying a future king, and again by convincing the world it was easy. You rise from your seat slowly, stretch your arms overhead, and wince at the lingering soreness. Your body feels like a bruised cathedral. Holy, but damaged. You walk to the cradle and place your hand gently on your son's chest, just to feel it move beneath your fingers. You don't need a document to tell you what this moment means, but the kingdom does, so let them have their story. You'll keep the truth for yourself. There's something unnervingly theatrical about how quickly the court moves on. One moment you're the focal point of every whispered conversation, every ceremonial toast. The next, the celebration has curdled into silence and people are back to worrying about harvests, skirmishes at the border, and which bishop is feuding with which treasurer. You've given them what they wanted, a child, a boy, a future, and now that they have it, you're expected to quietly step back into your ornamental role, gleaming politely from the edge of every room like a crown on a shelf, visible, revered, but not touched. But your body hasn't moved on. It lags behind the pageantry, stubborn and slow. Your hips still ache when you sit too long. Your breasts leak at inconvenient times. There are bruises you didn't know you had, healing in shades of blue and yellow just beneath your skin. Every smile you give is painted over fatigue. And still you show up, because you have to. And the child? He's rarely in your arms anymore. He's been swept into a world of nannies and tutors and religious supervision. The royal nurse reports to your husband, not to you. The bishop oversees his spiritual conditioning, even though the boy can't yet form full words. You're allowed visits, of course, twice a day, in carefully timed sessions that feel more like appointments than motherhood. Sometimes you find yourself asking permission to hold him, and when you realise what you're doing, the shame tastes metallic. The court's attention, meanwhile, has begun to swirl elsewhere. Rumours of your next child have already started, quietly but insistently. Nobles nudge each other during dinner. Courtiers politely mention the importance of securing the succession, as if one living child is a happy accident, not a foundation, as if your womb is a dice cup and the game must be played again immediately. You begin to feel the weight of something sinister, replacement. And here comes the truly strange part. You begin to suspect that your body is no longer trusted, that the very people who once knelt in awe at your belly now wonder whether it was ever truly yours. The paranoia creeps in subtly. A midwife reassigned without notice, a handmaiden suddenly silent. The physician starts referring to you not as Her Majesty, but as the Queen Dowager in waiting, though in jest. Except it doesn't feel like a joke. Here's your historical fact. In 1541, Queen Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, was accused of adultery. Based on little more than gossip and her previous flirtations before marriage, she was imprisoned, interrogated, and ultimately executed at age 19. Her real crime wasn't infidelity, it was having a past. A history that didn't fit the narrative. Once the shine of novelty wore off, she was no longer seen as pure, and in a world obsessed with queenly virtue, that was a death sentence. And now we come to one of the strangest, darkest tricks of royal history: phantom pregnancies. The phenomenon isn't rare. It has haunted royal courts across centuries. Queens so desperate or so pressured that their minds and bodies conspire to simulate pregnancy. Missed periods, nausea, swollen bellies, even breast milk. And yet no child. You hear whispers of it even now. That Queen Juana of Castile once walked through the halls stroking her stomach and whispering lullabies to an heir that wasn't there. That Anne Boleyn was said to have miscarried a ghost. That queens who failed to produce heirs sometimes staged their own conceptions, stuffed their bellies, forged letters, bribed midwives to buy time, protection, even love. Here's your fringe fact. In 1558, Queen Mary of England believed she was pregnant. She showed all the signs. The kingdom celebrated. A nursery was prepared. Months passed and no child came. The belly receded. It was called a phantom pregnancy, but many at the time whispered darker explanations. Curses, divine punishment, the devil's trickery. She died soon after, her body hollow, her legacy consumed by silence. And here's the twist. The deception wasn't always intentional. Sometimes the Queen herself believed it. Belief so fierce it bent the body. You think about that now. The weight of expectation, the hunger to matter, the knowledge that your entire value hinges on something as elusive and uncontrollable as conception. Could you imagine your body into motherhood? Could you believe your way into safety? You begin to understand how the pressure breaks women, not in public, but slowly, gently, like frost on a branch. The scholarly debate here is ongoing. Were these phantom pregnancies truly psychosomatic, driven by anxiety and hope? Or were they crafted illusions, deliberate acts of political theatre? Most agree it's all a little of both. Some were cases of genuine hormonal imbalance. Others were the work of desperate queens navigating courts where childlessness was a sin, a weakness, a threat. The deeper question is this: did anyone care whether the pregnancies were real as long as the kingdom believed? You feel your body differently now, with suspicion. Every ache is a symptom, every cramp is evidence. You find yourself counting the days between your cycles with quiet dread, not out of desire, but fear. What happens if you can't produce another heir? What happens if your womb is declared spent? You begin to imagine the options. Not future children, but future stories. Could you fake it? Could you mimic the lines? You even consider what herbs to drink, and which ones to avoid, just in case it comes to that. Because here's the awful truth. A queen who fakes a pregnancy might be caught. But a queen who doesn't try, she's disposable. So you wait, you perform, you mull, you smile in court, you kneel during mass, you hold your son twice a day, long enough to remember what it feels like to matter. And in the hours between, you watch the shadows move through your chamber, and wonder whether your body will ever be your own again. Because in this kingdom, the appearance of fertility is sometimes more valuable than fertility itself, and you're no longer sure which you possess. They start calling you the Virgin Queen, and the name settles like frost across your title. At first, it seems like a compliment. There's something reverent in the tone when the clerics use it, as if you've ascended beyond flesh and into myth. You nod politely, offer a saintly smile, let your hands rest folded in your lap. But inside you feel the subtle grip of the label tightening like a corset. Virgin. Not the woman who's already given birth. Not the woman who bled and cried and screamed her way through labour. Virgin, holy, untouched, carefully rebranded. You haven't shared your bed with your husband since your son was born. Not because of illness or distance or political tension. It just never happened. There were no requests, no need. You fulfilled your duty. The court no longer talks about passion or airs. They talk about your purity, your piety, your quiet devotion. And you begin to realise the power in it. Because in the same world where being childless could doom you, celibacy can shield you. You watch from your throne as alliances are forged and tested. You hear your name offered in marriage negotiations, not to foreign kings, but as a sacred figurehead, a woman who has